So what about close friends? Getting more tonight.
Oh, Mazel Tov. Yeah, okay.
Help planet.
Okay, gotcha. All right, let's get started. Good morning. All right, so we had started this tshuva yesterday regarding food poisoning. Okay, and I don't know if any of you had a chance to read the article that Marv sent. As far as like, there's a whole forensic profession to be able to prove food poisoning. Marv, do you want to give us a brief synopsis of the article?
Yeah, sure. So it's pretty much like negligence where but you have to show causation, which is, you ate the food, you got sick from the food, and that being sick from the food caused, damage to you. And along the way, normally, how do you prove it? So you prove it normally from a diagnosis, like Joby was mentioning yesterday, and the article shows all kinds of different pathogens that actually can cause that. So you have to first get a diagnosis. Don't take medication before you have the diagnosis, because the medication could be argued by the insurance company or the defendant that caused the problem. So you have to have a chain, essentially a chain of custody or chain of distribution that you have to show. So starting from the farmer,
a stool sample also.
You have to do a stool sample to test what you got sick from, like what's in your body. That's generally how they do it, I guess. And then you link it. Now, if you don't have any of that, as I was trying to say yesterday, sometimes the court, like for example, Rabbi, you explained your wedding, 35 people or whatever got sick from the same meal. That could be an inference that the judge could use to say that caused the same people, the same damage from the same source. So some of those elements could be proven from a logical inference, inductive reasoning, right? To say, that kind of thing. If the inference is strong enough, the court could conclude that was the cause of the damage that caused you loss, and that's pretty much the story.
All right, thank you. So that's what we started talking about. If you can make a conclusive evidentiary demonstration that the hotel caused the food poisoning, then the hotel is liable to pay for the food, to pay for damages, and whatever the court assesses. What if you can't prove it, but there's circumstantial evidence, like Marv was just saying? So that's the second part of the tshuva. And we started talking about this case yesterday, where there seems to be a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Acha regarding if you find a dead animal next to a violent animal, but you didn't see the one animal gore the other, what is the halacha? So the Chachamim say you cannot say for sure that the dead animal died as a result of the live animal. But Rabbi Acha says that if you have gamal ha'ocher ben hagimalim, if you have a camel that's in heat and he's a wilde chaya, he's really getting wild, and you see that a camel is dead right next to him, biyadua shezeh harago. It's quite clear that the wild camel killed him. V'hatur pasak kirabanan delo azli basar umdana v'chein pasak morin b'shulchan aruch. And that seems to be the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Ella shematzinu bekama mekomos b'Talmud does linan basar umdana. But there are other places in the Talmud that we do go after circumstantial evidence when there's a preponderance of inference, like Marvin was saying. Ki hahi de Baba Basra hahu gavra de shama lidvisu de kamar librata. So there was a man who heard his wife saying to her daughter, Amai lotzaniat, hahi itza bi isura, asara bani isli, velesle me'avuch elachad. So she said to her daughter, why is it that I can't control myself and be modest? I have 10 sons, and I only have one son from your father. So, in other words, there was a man, the man heard his wife telling this over to her daughter. She thought that they were alone, she and her daughter, and she didn't realize that her husband was home.
They call some doozies.
Kishachiv, so when he passed away, Omar kol nechasai lechad bri de isli. So as he was dying, he said, I want all of my estate to go to my single son, my solitary son.
My only
son.
The son I love.
Lo yadu inshi laheminahu. It's like well, gee, I was wondering why all nine of my 10 kids are black. I didn't know. You're right. So
Talk about the black sheep of the
right,
family.
yeah. So lo yadu inshi
flock.
laheminahu. So the people didn't know which son he was referring to. Asu lakame de Rebbe Bena'a Amr lahu zilu chavitu lekavra da avuchan adekai umagli luchu laheminaychu. A very strange narrative. They came to Rebbe Bena'a, and he told them, "Go and chavitu, bang on your father's grave until he arises and reveals to you which one it is." Azal kulhu vehahi debrei lo azal. So all of them went. I have to really actually make sure I'm translating the Gemara correctly. It's Bava Basra Daf Nun Ches Amid Aleph. Safaria. Let's see, Talmud. Nun Ches Amid Aleph, that's 58a. Okay, here we go. Okay, there was a certain man who heard his wife saying to her daughter, "Why do you not act clandestinely when you engage in forbidden sexual intercourse, like I do? For after all, I have 10 sons, and I have only one from your father, and no one knows. So too, you must be careful so that no one will discover your illicit behavior." Having overheard that only one son was his, when the man was dying, he said to his family, "All my property is left to one son." They didn't know to which of them he intended to leave his property. They came before Rebbe Bena'a for guidance, and he said to them, "Go strike your father's grave until he rises and reveals to you which of you he left his property." They all went, but that one son did not go. Rebbe Bena'a said to them, "All of the property belongs to the son who did not go." The other brothers were angry. They went and slandered Rebbe Bena'a in the king's house. They said, "There is a man among the Jews who removes money from people without witnesses and without any evidence." The king's guards brought Rebbe Bena'a and imprisoned him. The wife of Rebbe Bena'a went and said to the guards, "I had one servant. They cut off his head and skinned him and ate his flesh, and they fill him with water and give their friends to drink from him, and they have not paid me his value, nor have they rented him." They did not know what she was saying to them. They said, "Let us bring the wise man of the Jews and let him say what she meant." They called Rebbe Bena'a, and he said to them, "She spoke to you of a water skin." In other words, she was referring to a goat she owned that was slaughtered, its meat eaten, and its skin made into a water skin that could be filled with drinking water. They said, "Since he is so wise, let him sit at the gate where the judges congregate and render judgment." Rabbi Menah saw that it was written upon the gate, "Any judge who is summoned to judgment is not considered a judge, as judges must be above reproach." He said to them, "If that is so, then if a person comes from elsewhere and summons a judge to judgment, has he disqualified the judge even if he were later to be exonerated?" Okay, the story goes on and on and on. So we're not going to continue the whole story. Rabbi Benah was actually one of these mystical kinds of figures in the Gemara. But in any event, we have the story. So we do see that one rabbi was able to paskin based on circumstantial evidence that the one son who stayed behind was in all likelihood the man's real son, because he had an affinity for his father and was not interested in banging on the father's grave. Only someone who's not your real son would have the chutzpah to take a shovel and start banging on the grave.
Right.
So that was as if it's your own father, you're not going to have that kind of chutzpah, and that's how Rabbi Benah was able to infer it. V'chein gabe shtar mavrachas as linan basar umdana demuchach. Okay, what's a shtar mavrachat? So if we take a look once again, ksuva staf ayin tes amid aleph. $79A. Okay. The mother came before Rav Nachman for judgment. Rav Nachman tore the document accepting her claim that she did not intend to transfer ownership of her property. What's the story here? There was a certain woman who was about to remarry after she was divorced or widowed, who sought to distance the rights to her property from her future husband. She therefore wrote a document stipulating that her property be given as a gift to her daughter before marriage. Ultimately, the mother was married and then divorced. She wanted the daughter to return the property. It's almost like what you do with tax shelters, right? A parent will gift the house to the kids in order to avoid having to pay higher taxes or whatever. So she wanted her daughter to return the property, and her daughter claimed that it was given to her as a gift. The mother came before Rav Nachman for judgment. Rav Nachman tore the document, accepting her claim that she did not intend to transfer ownership of her property. Rav Anan went before Mar Ukva, the exilarch, and said to him, "Let the master observe Nachman the farmer, how he tears people's documents." Rav Anan was upset that Rav Nachman destroyed a legitimate document. Mar Ukva said to him, "Tell me, please, what was the actual incident?" Rav Anan said to Mar Ukva, "This and that transpired." He apprised him of all the details. So Mar Ukva said to him, "Are you saying it was a document of evasion, shtar mavrachat?" This is what Rav Chaniloi Bar Idi said, that Shmuel said, "I'm an authority who issues rulings and have issued the following directive. If a document of evasion comes to my hand, I will tear it, as it is clear that it was not intended for the actual transfer of property, but merely to distance it from someone else." There too, you're making an inference based on the circumstantial evidence. Okay, so you do see. Okay, v'chein gabe kosav kol nechasav la'acher v'achar kach noda sheyesh lo ben. Let's say another case. The Gemara in Bava Basra says a person thinks he has no heirs. So he writes a document saying all of my assets will go to my friend. All of a sudden, he discovers a young man shows up on his door and says, "Daddy," right? Now, okay, we won't ask how that happened, but now that he knows that he has an heir, he wants to nullify the shtar that is a gift to his friend for his whole estate. So the Gemara says that he can. Based on his previous, now we know that if he would have known that he has a child, he wouldn't have done that. Another example is if a person is a shchiv meira and he divests his entire estate by giving it to one of the heirs, we don't say that that's legally binding because we assume that he wants to retain a small portion of it. And also, let's say a person sells all of his assets because he thinks he's making aliyah, and then all of a sudden the plans fall through. He's permitted to nullify the sale under certain circumstances. Let's say he sells his house, and they fill out all of the documentation, and Then the guy says, oh my gosh, I realized I can't make aliyah. I have to stay here. And so he wants to withdraw the sale. So under certain circumstances, the Gemara says you are permitted to do so because the circumstances indicate that you were only selling your house because you thought you were leaving for Eretz
Does the
Yisrael.
buyer know that though?
Yeah, you'd have to say that the buyer had to know that. Yeah. So we're not going to go into the whole case over there, but the bottom line is that you see that a Beis Din can reverse a legally binding contract based on an inference that it was only done under certain conditions, even when those conditions were not explicitly stipulated at the time of the sale. And Heviyam Hatur B'Shem Harash. And the Torah actually quotes these. V'chein ha'hita Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah lo kasav la ela almanas lakonsa. There's a case of Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah. Let's take a look. Ksuvas Nun Daled Amid Aleph. Let's go back to our Sefaria. Nun Daled Amid Aleph. That's 54a. Okay, for some reason. Okay. Although this is a Mishnah, although they said as a principle that a virgin collects 200 dinars as payment for her kasuva, and that a widow only collects 100 dinars, if the husband wishes to add even an additional 10,000 dinars, he may add it. That's what we call tosefet ketubah. You can always add to the dowry that's on the ketubah. If she is then widowed or divorced, whether from betrothal or whether from marriage, she collects the entire amount, including the additional sum. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, if she is widowed or divorced from marriage, she collects the total amount. But if she is widowed or divorced from betrothal, meaning that he gave her the ketubah at the time of the erisin, which was typically done 12 months before they consummated the marriage. So then a virgin collects 200 dinars and a widow 100 dinars. This is because he wrote the additional amount for her in the marriage contract, only with having in mind that he was actually going to live with her as husband and wife. But if he died before then, or he divorced her before then she's not entitled to collect that additional amount. That makes sense, but that's based on umdana, that's based on an inference of what he had in mind. Okay. Another case is if a person sells off something because he was distressed for cash, and then he realizes he doesn't need the cash after all. The purchase opportunity fell through or whatever. He's allowed to reverse the sale. That's a Gemara in Ksuvah Stuff Pei Hey Amid Beis. Let's take a quick look. That's 85b. Let's see, 85b. Let's take a look under Chasa. Okay. The Gemara relates a similar incident. There was a certain man who deposited a silver goblet in the house of the sage Chasa. Chasa passed away without instructing anything about the goblet. They came before Rav Nachman to discuss the ownership of the goblet. He said to them, I know about Chasa that he was not wealthy, and this goblet would not have belonged to him. And furthermore, the depositor has provided a distinguishing mark. And we said so only if the claimant does not usually enter and exit there. But if that person usually enters and exits there, one can say that a different person might have deposited the object and he merely saw it there. Bottom line is, the Gemara says you can go according to umdana. You can say basically that it stands to reason that this person is the owner of the goblet based on circumstantial evidence. V'im kain, yesh lahavin madua pa'amim azlinan basar umdana l'chayiv mamanu pa'amim shalo. So the basic question is, why is it that sometimes the Gemara says you can follow circumstantial evidence, and why is it sometimes that you can't? Ubir Rabbeinu Yosef Kolon, the Yeshnei Mine Umdana, that there are two types of inference or estimation in halacha. D'chol heicha shehamaisa mivurar etzel hadayanim, ela she'anachnu mesupakim be'umdan das hanoseno hamocher o hamegaresh azlinan basar umdana. That when the matter is clear to the dayanim, but that we're still in doubt, and we have to use an estimation of what the thoughts were. In other words, there's a clear-cut halacha that if I sell something or I give something, a woman a ksuva with added amounts, but then I divorce her shortly thereafter, it's clear that the halacha is that she's not entitled to that amount, or that the sale is not binding. But we simply don't know whether that was the intent of the person. We don't know for sure, but we have to make an inference. If that was because it was never stipulated explicitly. So there we can use our umdandas. There we can use an estimation that that's what he was probably thinking. But let's say we don't know what actually happened. In other words, one case is we know what happened. We're not sure what was in the mind of the person when he did that action. But there's another kind of umdana, of circumstantial inference, where we don't know for sure what happened. Okay? Ki yahid de gamal ha'ocher de'en yadua lanu im nagcho v'im lav ela mitoch omed. Where there's circumstantial evidence that the camel killed the other camel, but we don't know for sure what happened. So one is ontological, the other one is epistemological, to use the fancy terminology. One is where we know what happened, we just don't know what was in the guy's mind. The other one is we don't even know what happened, but we're making an inference that in all likelihood, this is what happened, and that's the case of the camel. In that situation, with the exception of Rabbi Acha, we paskin that you don't follow circumstantial evidence if you don't know for sure. Like if you find the smoking gun, proverbially, and the dead person next to it, you can't convict someone based on that circumstantial evidence because no one saw it happen. But let's say you saw that a so-and-so did a transaction, but you just don't know what was in his mind when he did the transaction, then you're allowed to use umdana according to everybody. He says that's one way of creating a distinction in halacha. He says, but this answer will not provide a solution in all cases. In the case of Rebbe Binah, what was the case again? You guys remember the case of Rebbe Binah, who was the mystic? Where, bang on the grave. Yeah, we still don't know who the kid is, who's really? Mama's baby, daddy's maybe, right? Guf ha'maisa, there's an old song like that. Yeah, Guf ha'maisa, lo nitbarer eitzel hadayanim mi beno ha'amiti. The judges don't know who the real son is. But nonetheless, he paskined that the one son who went to refuse to bang on the grave is the real son. So that's even though the Maharik provides that answer, it's insufficient to say that that's all the time that we're going to use that distinction in halacha. So I looked at Rav Avaji Yosef's sefer, Shegam hiksha ech samach Rabbi Bena al hach umdana lahavkiya hayerusha misha'ar ha'achim. He asked the same question. What right did Rabbi Bena have to take away the Yerusha from the other 9 sons based on just that circumstantial evidence? V'hosif the kol shekain shahayamakom lomar sheha'isha shechashva sharak ben echad hu mibala to abazeh. He says, and furthermore, there's a different argument to make. This woman clearly was a loose woman, the mother with the 10 sons, right? But that doesn't mean that she knew with absolute certainty that the other 9 kids were not her husband's. After all, we say rov be'ilo sachar habal. We say that the majority of times that a woman is intimate is with her husband, even if she is an adulteress. So there's a higher probability that she got pregnant from her husband than she got pregnant from another man. That's not such a strong question, because it could be that in this particular case, you could say the husband was, she knows the reason why she played around is because her husband had a very low libido. And maybe that's how she knew that the other kids were not from her husband. Who knows? That's exactly what he says, Rav Ovadia. He says, unless you say that the other 9 kids were born when the guy was already at a reduced level of virility. He was already older. In which case we don't say that we have to assume that the majority of intimacy was with the husband. But we still don't have an answer to our question. How could Rabbi Benah paskin that all the estate went to one son based on that circumstantial evidence? Od kasha al hamari kanal deharei hayi uvda dechasa asafek haya beguf hamaisa va'afilo hachi hotziu mamon al pi ha'umdana. And the other case was the case of that man Chasa, who was a very poor man, and they found a silver goblet in his house, and they knew for sure it couldn't have been his. And the guy said, "I gave him my silver goblet for safekeeping." So that's all circumstantial. Do we know for a fact what happened? No, it's a circumstantial evidence kind of thing, and it's not just an estimation of what's in a person's mind. And yet they still paskin that you give it to the guy who's claiming that it's his goblet. V'yesh lomar. So we would have to answer the hasam shiny al pi masha kasaf hanesivos. De beumdena hayudua lechol haolam kegon yadana be bechas delo amid yesh ladain ladun al pi umdena zu afilu lahotzi. So the case of chasa you could answer is that if everybody knows that that man chasa was a pauper and he couldn't possibly have ever afforded a silver goblet, then that's the reason why a judge can make that estimation. And that's the language of the Gemara. Yadana be bechasa de lo amid. I know, and everybody knows. That's what you have to assume. Everybody knows this fact. It's not just that I'm making an estimation. Everybody knows he didn't have any money. Now, even that's a little bit problematic, because how many times have we heard of the guy who everybody thought was a pauper, and then you tear open his mattress and it's filled with cash, or or he donates a wing to the hospital,
Maybe he inherited it from somebody.
or maybe he inherited it. Yeah, right. So it's still very circumstantial. Amnam benidon didan kaven she'in raya berur shehacholi shekibel hatovei kara machmat achilat oichel hamalon. He says, in our case, you can't really prove with certainty that the sickness that the person acquired, the food poisoning, came from the hotel. And that's true because even though some other guests got sick, the majority of the people did not get sick. And therefore, and maybe the person who got sick had a specific allergy or a food sensitivity, and that coincided with other guests, and that's why he got sick. So you're not going for it, no, because you can tell the difference, right?
Those kids ate somewhere else first. So if they went and had a snack first.
They had a tour and they got one out.
No, whatever.
Had a shawarma somewhere else.
They had a coffee shop somewhere, and then they went to the function.
Okay, so therefore, I hear what you're saying, but let's just get to the punchline. Asher al kain ein l'chayev es hanhalat beit hamalon l'shalem. Therefore, when you don't have proof, like taking a sample to the lab of the food or of the stool, you can't hold the hotel liable. Ulam b'haskamas hatzdadim latzeis yudei shamayim v'shlotia k'peida bein hatzdadim huskam b'leiv shalim u'v'nefesh chafetz l'shahamalon yifatzeh et hatoveya u'v'nei beito l'sof shavua b'malon. V'hatzdadim yiskimu l'zeh machlu l'zeh l'zeh v'emes v'hashalom ehavu. But in this particular case, the hotel negotiated with the guest and said, we'll give you a free week in the hotel. We'll give you a free weekend in the hotel, you and your family, to sort of make up for.
That's a good fight.
They're saying that it was their fault.
In other words, it was a compromise out of goodwill.
Right.
We claim that we didn't make you sick, but we don't want there to be bad feelings. We want you to be a happy patron of our hotel.
Come back
And
Come back.
Yeah,
come back and eat again and then slander us.
yeah, that's right. And we don't want you to go on Yelp and give us a bad review.
So circumstantial, can you prove from circumstantial? You can't. What's the, I don't get the bottom line.
Bottom line is that he has not answered this. He sort of sidestepped the question, and basically we don't have an answer about how.
The hotel question.
Well, he says we still have a tzarachian on the Gemara, but in the case of the hotel, we really don't have evidence that the hotel is responsible if we don't have a lab proof from the lab.
So Rabbi, in your case, when you got married, really, they didn't have to do it. They just wanted to keep a good name, right? Technically, did they really have to compensate you what they did?
So according to what he's saying, this was all done out of court. But I mean, they basically, we dealt with the insurance company and we came to a settlement, right? So this will happen in most cases. It'll never go to court. The hotel has an insurance.
They obviously want to settle and not ruin their business.
Yeah.
But bottom line though, are you chayiv or are you not chayiv?
So his psak is that if you don't have absolute proof, you can say, I'm not going to pay.
And when it comes to dini mamanas versus dini nefashos, like also can you have used like. at a
Like what
different
if
level?
the hotel ended up killing somebody?
Right, so.
Yeah.
At what level do you?
It doesn't make a
No,
difference
that's
if there's
that's
circumstantial evidence, like, you know.
Instead the smoking gun is next to the, like.
Yeah, but if it had got to the point where there was actually a fatality, then there'd be more people involved. You'd have more.
Remember, okay, we're gonna have to pick this up tomorrow, but remember, he said everyone wanted to be Yotzei Yidei Shamayim, even the hotel. So that's why they said it. Okay, we'll pick it up tomorrow.